The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the country club, as my son Marcus stood before 200 of our closest friends and family members. His voice carried across the elegant reception hall with a confidence that made my blood run cold. "Let's be honest here," Marcus said, adjusting his designer tie as he addressed the crowd gathered for his engagement party. "My mother has always been more of a decorative piece in our family. Pretty to look at, but when it comes to real contributions, real value, well..." He paused, letting out a laugh that cut through me like glass. "She's never really had anything meaningful to offer." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The room fell silent except for the soft jazz music still, playing in the background. I felt every pair of eyes in that room turn toward me, watching, waiting for my reaction. Some faces showed shock, others embarrassment, and a few seemed to nod in agreement. My hands trembled as I stood there in my navy blue dress, the one I had spent weeks choosing for this special occasion, suddenly feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my 62 years of life. But what my son didn't know in that moment, what none of them knew, was that hidden away in a safety deposit box downtown sat documents that would prove just how wrong he was about my worth, documents that would change everything. My name is Margaret Chen, and for most of my adult life, I believed I was living the American dream. I came to this country from Taiwan when I was 23, carrying nothing but a nursing degree, basics, English skills, and dreams bigger than the single suitcase I could afford. I met Robert Chen during my first year working at General Hospital in Chicago. He was a young resident, ambitious and kind, with gentle hands and a smile that made me forget how homesick I felt most days. We married quickly, maybe too quickly, but it felt right at the time. Robert was everything I thought I wanted in a husband. He was stable, intelligent, and he promised me a life where I would never have to worry about money again. Coming from a family that had struggled financially, in Taiwan, this promise felt like winning the lottery. The early years were beautiful in their simplicity. We lived in a modest apartment on the north side of Chicago while Robert finished his residency. I continued working as a nurse, pulling long shifts at the hospital while he studied late into the night. We were a team then, both working toward the same goals, both dreaming of the family we would build together. When Marcus was born, everything changed. Robert's medical practice was beginning to flourish, and he suggested I take time off to focus on raising our son. It seemed natural at the time. Robert was earning enough to support us comfortably, and I wanted to be present for every milestone in Marcus's life. I wanted to be the mother who baked cookies for school events, who never missed a soccer game, who created the kind of warm, stable home I had always dreamed of having. So I stepped away from my career. What I thought would be a temporary break stretched into years, then decades. As Robert's practice grew and his reputation as one of Chicago's top cardiologists solidified, our lifestyle expanded accordingly. We moved to a beautiful home in Lincoln Park, then later to an even grander estate in Lake Forest. We took family, vacations to Europe, enrolled Marcus in the best private schools, and surrounded ourselves with other successful families who seemed to have it all figured out. But somewhere along the way, I began to disappear. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice it at first. Robert would come home from the hospital and talk about his day, his patients, his colleagues, his achievements. When he asked about my day, I would share stories about Marcus's school activities, the charity fundraiser I was organizing, or the garden I was tending. Slowly, his eyes would glaze over, and he would nod politely before changing the subject back to something he found more interesting. Marcus grew up watching these interactions. He saw how his father's work was treated as important, valuable, worthy of respect and attention. He saw how my contributions were acknowledged with polite smiles and quick subject changes. Without anyone explicitly saying it, the message became clear in our household. Robert's work mattered. My work, whatever that was, did not. As Marcus entered his teenage years, this dynamic became more pronounced. He began dismissing my opinions during family discussions, often saying things like, "Mom, you don't really understand how the real world works." When I would try to give him advice about school or relationships, he would roll his eyes and seek guidance from his father instead. Robert, exhausted from his demanding schedule, rarely corrected this behavior. If anything, he seemed to find it amusing. The worst part was how I began to internalize these messages. I started questioning my own judgment, my own intelligence, my own worth. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had been out of the workforce for so long that I had lost touch with reality. Maybe my contributions really weren't as valuable as I thought they were. But there was something Marcus and Robert never knew about me, something I had kept carefully hidden for over 20 years. Before I met Robert, before I became the perfect doctor's wife, before I disappeared into the background of my own life, I had been making investments. Small ones at first, then larger ones as I learned more about the market. My father, despite our family's financial struggles, had taught me about money from a young age. He believed that women needed to be financially independent, that we could never rely solely on others to take care of us. When I came to America, I took every extra dollar from my nursing salary and invested it carefully, methodically. I studied the market during my breaks at the hospital, read financial newspapers in the library, and slowly built a portfolio that grew steadily over the years. Even after I married Robert, I continued investing secretly. I used a small inheritance from my grandmother and money I had saved from my nursing career to fund my investments. Over the decades, as technology stocks soared and real estate values climbed, my secret portfolio grew into something substantial, something that would shock my family if they ever discovered it. I kept this money separate from our family finances, managed through a private investment firm downtown. I told myself I was saving it for emergencies, for Marcus's future, for our retirement. But as the years passed and my family's dismissive treatment continued, I began to think of it as something else entirely. Insurance, protection, proof that I was more than the decorative piece they believed me to be. Robert's success as a cardiologist had provided us with a comfortable lifestyle, but what he didn't know was that my secret investments had grown to dwarf his annual income. The modest nurse from Taiwan had become a millionaire several times over, and no one in my family had any idea. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they saw me as financially dependent, someone who contributed nothing of value to our family's success, I was actually the one with the most substantial wealth. But I had kept this secret for so long that I wasn't sure how to reveal it, or if I even wanted to. Marcus grew up in luxury, attending elite private schools and later prestigious universities, all while believing that his father's medical practice was the source of our family's wealth. He developed an entitled attitude that worried me, but whenever I tried to address it, my concerns were brushed aside. Robert would say that Marcus was just confident, that he was destined for great things, that a little arrogance was natural for someone with his advantages. By the time Marcus graduated from Northwestern with a business degree, he had fully absorbed the family dynamic. He treated me with the kind of polite condescension usually reserved for elderly relatives or family. Pets. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He would pat my hand when I expressed opinions, smile indulgently when I shared my thoughts, and generally act as though I was a sweet but ultimately irrelevant presence in his life. When Marcus announced his engagement to Charlotte Whitman, daughter of a prominent Chicago attorney, I was genuinely happy for him. Charlotte seemed like a lovely young woman, intelligent and ambitious in her own right. She worked in marketing for a downtown firm and carried herself with the kind of confidence I wished I had maintained throughout my marriage. The engagement party was Robert's idea. He wanted to celebrate at the Lakewood Country Club, our family's longtime social hub, with an elegant reception that would properly announce Marcus and Charlotte's union to Chicago society. I threw myself into planning the event, coordinating with caterers, florists, and the club's event staff to ensure everything would be perfect. For weeks leading up to the party, I felt genuinely excited. This was exactly the kind of event I was supposed to be good at organizing. Finally, here was something where my contributions would be visible and appreciated. I chose the menu carefully, selected flowers that would complement the club's sophisticated atmosphere, and even coordinated with Charlotte to ensure her preferences were incorporated into every detail. The night of the party, I dressed carefully. In my navy blue dress, applied my makeup with extra care, and felt proud of the beautiful event I had created. The ballroom looked stunning, filled with white roses and soft lighting. The catering was flawless, and the guest list included some of Chicago's most prominent families. Everything was exactly as it should be. Marcus looked handsome in his tailored-eye suit, and Charlotte was radiant in a cream-colored dress that perfectly complemented her auburn hair. As I watched them greet guests and accept congratulations, I felt a mother's natural pride. Despite our complicated relationship, Marcus was my son, and I wanted nothing but happiness for him. Robert gave the first toast, speaking eloquently about Marcus's achievements and potential. He talked about the medical practice he hoped Marcus might join someday, about the legacy they were building together, about how proud he was of the man Marcus had become. The guests applauded warmly, and I found myself smiling despite the familiar sting of being overlooked in Robert's narrative of our family's success. Then Marcus stepped forward to give his own speech. I expected him to thank Robert and me for our support, to acknowledge Charlotte's family, to express gratitude for the love and opportunities he had received. Instead, he began talking about success, about earning one's place in the world, about the difference between people who contribute real value and those who simply coast along. As his words became more pointed, more specifically directed at me, I felt my stomach begin to churn. The room seemed to grow quieter, the attention more focused, and then came the moment that changed everything. "Let's be honest here," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "My mother has always been more of a decorative piece in our family. Pretty to look at, but when it comes to real contributions, real value, well, she's never really had anything meaningful to offer." The words hit me like a physical blow. In front of 200 people, including many of my friends and acquaintances, my own son had just dismissed my entire existence as meaningless. The humiliation was overwhelming, but what hurt even more was the casual way he said it, as though it was simply an obvious truth that everyone already understood. I looked around the room and saw a mixture of expressions. Some people looked genuinely shocked by Marcus's cruelty. Others seemed uncomfortable, studying their champagne glasses, or checking their phones to avoid meeting my eyes. But there were others, too many others, who nodded slightly in agreement or exchanged knowing glances with their spouses. This was how they saw me. This was how my own community, my own family, my own son viewed my life and my contributions. I was decorative. I was meaningless. I had nothing to offer. Robert's face was unreadable as he watched from across the room. He didn't step forward to defend me or correct Marcus. He simply stood there, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, allowing the moment to hang in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Charlotte looked mortified, tugging gently at Marcus's sleeve as she whispered something in his ear. But Marcus seemed oblivious to the discomfort he had caused. He raised his glass and continued with his toast as though nothing unusual had happened, as though he hadn't just publicly humiliated his own mother at what should have been a joyful family celebration. I remained frozen in place for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then, moving as though I were walking through water, I excused myself quietly and made my way to the ladies' room. I needed space to breathe, to think, to process what had just happened. In the privacy of the elegant bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror above the marble sink. My face was pale. My carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock and hurt in my eyes. I gripped the edge of the sink and tried to steady my breathing. How had it come to this? How had I become so invisible in my own life that my own son felt comfortable dismissing me publicly? How had I allowed myself to disappear so completely that even I was beginning to believe their narrative about my worthlessness? But then, as I stood there looking at myself, something else flickered in my eyes, something harder, sharper. Because while Marcus believed I had nothing to offer, while Robert and everyone else saw me as merely decorative, I knew something they didn't. I knew about the investment portfolio that had grown steadily for over 20 years. I knew about the real estate holdings, the stock options, the carefully diversified assets that had made me wealthier than anyone in my family realized. I knew about the trust fund I had secretly established for Marcus's future, funded entirely by my own investments and earning potential. Marcus thought I had nothing meaningful to offer. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. As I reapplied my lipstick and straightened my dress, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to defend myself or argue with Marcus about my worth. I wasn't going to plead for respect or demand apologies. Instead, I was going to show him exactly what I had to offer. And then I was going to take it all away. The drive home from the country club was silent. Robert sat behind the wheel of his Mercedes, occasionally glancing at me as though he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the right words. I stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. When we pulled into our circular driveway, Robert finally spoke. "Margaret, about what Marcus said tonight." I turned to look at my husband of 38 years. "What about it?" "Well, I think he was just nervous about the speech. You know how he gets when he's the center of attention. I'm sure he didn't mean it the way it sounded." Robert's attempt to minimize what had happened only confirmed what I already knew. Even my husband didn't see Marcus's words as particularly shocking or inappropriate. This was simply how our family operated, and everyone except me seemed comfortable with the dynamic. "Of course," I said quietly. "I'm sure you're right." That night, as Robert slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake thinking about my next steps. For 20 years, I had been planning for Marcus's future without his knowledge. I had established a trust fund that would provide him with financial security for the rest of his life. The fund was worth over $3 million, carefully invested, and managed to ensure steady growth. My original plan had been to surprise Marcus with this gift on his 30th birthday, just 2 months away. I had imagined his reaction, his gratitude, his newfound respect for the mother he had always underestimated. I had fantasized about the moment when he realized that his supposedly worthless mother had actually secured his financial future. But after tonight, that fantasy felt naive and foolish. Marcus didn't deserve my generosity. He had made it clear that he saw no value in me, no worth in my contributions, no reason to treat me with basic respect. Why should I reward that behavior? The trust fund was established in my name, with Marcus as the beneficiary. But the documents were structured in a way that gave me complete control over the timing and conditions of the transfer. I could modify the terms, change the beneficiary, or dissolve the trust entirely if I chose to do so. As I lay there in the darkness, I began to formulate a plan. Marcus believed I had nothing to offer, nothing of value to contribute to his life or anyone else's. I was going to give him the opportunity to live without any contributions from me, at all. Over the next few days, I went about my normal routine while quietly gathering the documents and information I would need. I visited my financial advisor, reviewed the trust documents, and explored my options. I also began paying closer attention to the subtle ways my family continued to dismiss and undervalue me. Robert continued his pattern of interrupting me during conversations or steering discussions away from topics I introduced. Marcus called twice during the week, both times asking me to handle various errands for him without once acknowledging what had happened at the engagement party. It was as though his public humiliation of me was already forgotten, just another insignificant moment in our family history. Charlotte, to her credit, called to apologize for Marcus's behavior. She seemed genuinely mortified by what had happened, and assured me that she had spoken to Marcus about his inappropriate comments. But when I asked what Marcus had said in response, Charlotte grew quiet. "He said he was just being honest," she admitted reluctantly. "He said that everyone knows you've never had a real career, so it wasn't like he was revealing some big secret." Even through Charlotte's obvious discomfort with the situation, Marcus's fundamental attitude was clear. He saw no reason to apologize because he believed he had simply stated an obvious truth. In his mind, I really was worthless, and pointing that out publicly was no different from commenting on the weather. That conversation with Charlotte was the final confirmation I needed. Marcus wasn't going to change his opinion of me based on guilt or social pressure. The only thing that might get his attention was a demonstration of exactly what he stood to lose by treating me with such contempt. I spent the following weekend alone while Robert attended a medical conference in Boston. This gave me the uninterrupted time I needed to make my preparations. I drove downtown to my investment firm's offices and met with David Kim, the financial advisor who had been managing my portfolio for the past 15 years. David was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my wealth. He had watched my careful investments grow over the years and had always treated me with the respect that came from understanding my financial acumen. When I explained what I wanted to do, he listened carefully without judgment. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Chen?" he asked after I outlined my plan. "This is a substantial amount of money to put at risk over a family dispute." "It's not about the money, David," I replied. "It's about respect. It's about making sure my son understands that actions have consequences." David nodded slowly. "I understand. And you're absolutely within your rights to modify or dissolve the trust. But have you considered less drastic alternatives? Perhaps a conversation with Marcus first?" I had considered that option, but I knew it wouldn't work. Marcus had never taken my words seriously before. Why would he start now? No. This situation required something more dramatic, something that would get his attention in a way that mere conversation never could. "The trust documents give me complete discretion over the timing and terms," I said. "I want to exercise that discretion." David began preparing the necessary paperwork while I outlined the specific modifications I wanted to make. Rather than dissolving the trust entirely, I decided to restructure it with new conditions that Marcus would need to meet in order to access the funds. These conditions would require him to demonstrate genuine respect and appreciation for my contributions to our family. As I signed the modified documents, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. This wasn't the outcome I had hoped for when I first established the trust. I had wanted to surprise Marcus with an act of generosity that would strengthen our relationship and secure his future. Instead, I was using that same money as a tool to teach him a lesson about respect and consequences. But sometimes love requires difficult choices. Sometimes caring for someone means allowing them to face the results of their actions, even when those results are painful. Marcus needed to learn that his words and behavior had real-world implications, and I was the only one positioned to teach him that lesson. The modified trust would remain secret until Marcus's 30th birthday, just 6 weeks away. On that day, instead of receiving an unexpected gift of $3 million, he would receive a letter explaining what he had lost and why. The letter would outline the conditions he could meet to restore his access to the trust, conditions that centered around acknowledging my worth and making genuine amends for his disrespectful behavior. I knew this plan carried risks. Marcus might refuse to meet the conditions, choosing pride over financial security. Robert might side with Marcus and turn our marriage into a battlefield. Our extended family and social circle might view my actions as petty or vindictive. But I had spent decades being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued. I had allowed my own family to treat me as though I was invisible, as though my thoughts and feelings and contributions meant nothing. The engagement party had simply been the final, most public example of a pattern that had been building for years. If I didn't take a stand now, when would I? If I didn't demand respect now, would I ever receive it? At 62 years old, I was running out of time to reclaim my place in my own life. This might be my last chance to show my family and myself that I was worth more than they realized. As I drove home from the financial advisor's office, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. For the first time in years, I was taking decisive action instead of simply reacting to other people's behavior. I was setting boundaries instead of accepting disrespect. I was choosing to value myself even if no one else would. The next few weeks would test everyone in my family. Marcus would learn whether his pride was worth more than $3 million. Robert would have to decide whether he would support his wife or his son. And I would discover whether the respect I was demanding was actually possible to achieve, or whether some relationships were too damaged to repair. But regardless of how the others responded, I had already won something important. I had reclaimed my own sense of worth. I had reminded myself that I was more than a decorative piece, more than a background figure in other people's stories. I was Margaret Chen, a woman who had built substantial wealth through careful planning and intelligent investing. I was someone with something meaningful to offer. And if my family couldn't see that value, then perhaps it was time they learned to live without it. The morning of Marcus's 30th birthday arrived with unseasonable warmth for early October in Chicago. I stood in my kitchen, preparing his favorite breakfast of blueberry pancakes and crispy bacon, just as I had done every year since he was 5 years old. The familiar ritual felt different this time, weighted with knowledge that would soon change everything between us. Robert had already left for an early surgery, kissing my cheek absently as he grabbed his travel mug of coffee. He had mentioned something about a dinner reservation he'd made for the three of us tonight at Marcus's favorite steakhouse, a celebration that now felt more like a farewell dinner than a birthday party. As I flipped the golden pancakes, I thought about the envelope sitting in my purse upstairs. Inside was a letter that would either wake Marcus up to the reality of his behavior or permanently damage our relationship. Either outcome felt necessary at this point. I had spent 30 years watching my son grow from a sweet child into an entitled adult who treated me like hired help rather than his mother. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Marcus had always been punctual, a trait he inherited from Robert's side of the family. I heard his key in the lock, followed by his voice calling out, "Mom, something smells incredible in here." He walked into the kitchen looking handsome and successful in his tailored business suit, his dark hair perfectly styled for another day at the consulting firm where he worked. At 30, Marcus had Robert's strong jawline and my dark eyes, though his carried none of the warmth I remembered from his childhood. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, setting a plate of steaming pancakes in front of him. He sat down at the kitchen island where he had eaten countless meals over the years, scrolling through his phone as he began eating. "Thanks, Mom. These are perfect as always." His tone was casual, distracted, the way one might thank a waitress at a restaurant. There was no acknowledgement of the effort I had put into remembering his preferences, no recognition that I had woken up early to prepare his favorite meal. It was simply expected, taken for granted like everything else I did. "I have something for you," I said, pulling the envelope from my purse. "Something special for your 30th birthday." Marcus looked up from his phone with mild interest. "Oh yeah? What is it?" I placed the cream-colored envelope on the counter between us. His name was written across the front in my careful handwriting, but there was nothing else to indicate what was inside. Marcus picked it up, weighing it in his hand as though trying to guess the contents. "It's not a check, is it?" he asked with a slight laugh. "You know Dad's already handling my student loans, and the firm is paying me pretty well now." His assumption that any gift from me would necessarily be financial, and his casual dismissal of even that possibility, reminded me why this moment was necessary. Marcus had never considered that I might have resources of my own, contributions of my own to make. In his mind, any money in our family came from Robert's medical practice. "Just read it," I said quietly. Marcus tore open the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. I watched his expression change as he read, confusion giving way to disbelief, then something approaching shock. He read it twice before looking up at me with an expression I had never seen before. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice strained. "No joke. Every word is true." Marcus read the letter again, this time more slowly. The document outlined the existence of the trust fund I had established for him, detailing its current value of just over $3 million and explaining how I had funded it through my own investments over the past 20 years. But it also explained the modifications I had made following his behavior at the engagement party. The letter was direct but not cruel. I had explained how his public dismissal of me had forced me to reconsider my plans for his financial future. I outlined specific conditions he could meet to restore his access to the trust, conditions that centered around treating me with genuine respect and acknowledging my contributions to our family. The letter made it clear that his access to the money was entirely dependent on his willingness to change his behavior. $3 million, Marcus said slowly, as though testing the words. "You've had $3 million this whole time?" "I've had investments, yes. I've been building wealth for our family's future while you and your father assumed I was just decorating the house and organizing charity events." Marcus stared at the letter, then at me, as though seeing me for the first time. "But where did this money come from? How is this possible?" I sat down across from him at the kitchen island, meeting his eyes directly. "I was a nurse before I married your father. I saved every dollar I could and invested it carefully. Even after I stopped working outside the home, I continued investing. That money has grown substantially over the years." "But Dad always said you didn't understand money, that you weren't good with financial things." The irony of that statement hung between us. Robert had spent decades managing our household finances while remaining completely unaware that his wife had quietly accumulated more wealth than he had. Marcus had absorbed his father's assumption that I was financially naive, never considering that I might have knowledge and skills that weren't visible in my day-to-day role as wife and mother. "Your father manages our household accounts," I said carefully. "He's never been involved with my personal investments." Marcus was still processing this information, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "So this trust fund, this $3 million, it's real? And you're really going to keep it from me because of some stupid comment I made at my engagement party?" His characterization of his public humiliation of me as some stupid comment told me everything I needed to know about whether he truly understood what he had done. Even now, faced with significant financial consequences, Marcus couldn't see his behavior as anything more than a minor mistake. "Read the conditions again," I said quietly. "They're not unreasonable." Marcus scanned the letter once more, his jaw tightening as he read. The conditions I had outlined were straightforward. He needed to write me a sincere apology acknowledging the hurt his words had caused. He needed to spend time with me, having real conversations where he listened to my thoughts and opinions without dismissing them. He needed to demonstrate, through actions rather than words, that he understood I was more than a decorative piece in our family. Most importantly, he needed to acknowledge publicly, in front of the same people who had witnessed his dismissal of me, that he had been wrong about my worth and contributions. This could be done at our upcoming family Christmas party, where many of the same guests from his engagement party would be present. "This is blackmail," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You're holding money hostage to force me to— what, pretend? I think you're more important than you are?" His words hit like a slap. Even faced with losing $3 million, Marcus couldn't bring himself to consider that I might actually be important, that his dismissal of me might have been genuinely wrong rather than simply impolitic. "I'm not asking you to pretend anything," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm asking you to treat me with the respect that any person deserves. I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, you don't know everything about your mother." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard garden. "This is insane. You're my mother. You're supposed to support me unconditionally, not manipulate me with money I never even knew existed. And you're my son. You're supposed to treat me with basic human decency, not humiliate me in front of 200 people." We stared at each other across the kitchen, the weight of 30 years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding filling the space between us. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in my expression stopped him. Perhaps he was finally beginning to understand that I was serious about this. "Does Dad know?" he asked finally. "Not yet, but he will soon." This seemed to rattle Marcus even more than the existence of the trust fund. He had always counted on Robert's support, on their united front against what they perceived as my emotional overreactions and impractical concerns. The idea that Robert might be as shocked by these revelations as Marcus was clearly hadn't occurred to him. "What if I refuse?" Marcus asked. "What if I don't meet your conditions?" "Then the trust will be dissolved and the money donated to charity. You'll never see a penny of it." Marcus's face went pale. $3 million was life-changing money, enough to buy a house, start a business, or simply provide security for decades to come. The consulting firm paid him well, but not well enough to accumulate that kind of wealth quickly. He was facing the loss of a financial opportunity that might never come again. "You would really do that? You would really give away $3 million just to prove a point?" "It's not about proving a point, Marcus. It's about demanding the respect that every human being deserves. It's about refusing to be invisible in my own family any longer." We stood in silence for several long minutes. Marcus continued staring out the window while I remained seated at the kitchen island, waiting to see how he would respond. The breakfast I had lovingly prepared sat forgotten between us, growing cold as our relationship entered uncharted territory. Finally, Marcus turned back to face me. "I need time to think about this." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, the conditions include a public acknowledgement at our Christmas party. If you wait too long to decide, you'll miss that opportunity." Marcus folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I should go. I need to get to work." "Your birthday dinner tonight." "I'll be there," he said quietly. "We can pretend this conversation never happened, at least until I figure out what I'm going to do." After Marcus left, I sat alone in my kitchen surrounded by the remnants of his birthday breakfast. The pancakes had gone cold, the bacon had congealed on his barely touched plate. It felt symbolic somehow, this evidence of care and effort that had been abandoned without thought. I cleared the dishes mechanically, my mind replaying every moment of our conversation. Marcus's shock had been genuine, but so had his immediate assumption that I was somehow wronging him by attaching conditions to money he hadn't even known existed. Even when faced with proof of my financial acumen and planning, his first instinct was to frame me as the villain in this scenario. The phone rang around 11 o'clock. It was Charlotte, calling to wish me a happy birthday on Marcus's behalf and to confirm details for dinner that evening. Her voice sounded strained, and I wondered if Marcus had already called her to share the morning's revelations. "Mrs. Chen, is everything okay?" Charlotte asked after we had finished discussing restaurant details. Marcus seemed really upset when he called earlier. So he had told her. I wasn't surprised. Marcus had always shared everything with Charlotte, often seeking her support when he felt his family was being unreasonable. I wondered how she would react to learning about the trust fund and the conditions I had attached to it. We had an important conversation this morning, I said carefully. I'm sure Marcus will share whatever he feels comfortable sharing with you. He mentioned something about money, about some kind of test you're putting him through. Mrs. Chen, I hope you know that Marcus really does love you, even if he doesn't always express it well. Charlotte's attempt to defend Marcus touched me, but it also highlighted how thoroughly he had managed to position himself as the victim in this situation. Even Charlotte, who had been mortified by his behavior at the engagement party, was now concerned that I was being unfair to him. I love Marcus too, I replied. That's exactly why I'm doing this. The rest of the day passed slowly. I tried to occupy myself with household tasks and errands, but my mind kept returning to the conversation with Marcus. I had known this moment would be difficult, but I hadn't anticipated how painful it would be to see my son's true feelings about me laid so bare. Robert called around 3 o'clock to confirm our dinner plans. His voice was cheerful, excited about celebrating Marcus's milestone birthday. He had no idea that our family dynamics were about to shift dramatically, and I found myself dreading the moment when I would have to tell him about the trust fund and my recent modifications to it. I spent extra time getting ready for dinner, choosing an emerald green dress that had always been one of Robert's favorites, and taking care with my makeup and hair. If this was going to be a difficult evening, at least I could face it looking confident and composed. The restaurant Robert had chosen was elegant and intimate, the kind of place where Chicago's professional elite went to celebrate special occasions. Marcus was already seated when Robert and I arrived, having clearly taken time to compose himself after our morning conversation. He stood to greet us, hugging me with what felt like genuine warmth for the first time in years. "Happy birthday, son," Robert said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder as we took our seats. 30 years old. I can hardly believe it. Time flies, Marcus agreed, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The first part of dinner proceeded normally. Robert talked about his day at the hospital. Marcus shared updates about his work projects, and I listened while contributing occasional comments that were politely acknowledged and quickly forgotten. It was the same dynamic that had characterized our family meals for years, but tonight it felt different to me. Tonight I was acutely aware of how thoroughly I had been relegated to the sidelines of my own family. As we waited for dessert, Robert raised his wine glass in a toast. To Marcus, on his 30th birthday. We're so proud of the man you've become, the career you're building, the life you're creating with Charlotte. Your mother and I couldn't be happier. Thanks, Dad. That means everything to me. The easy affection between father and son, the mutual respect and admiration, highlighted what was missing in my relationship with Marcus. Robert's approval had always been important to Marcus in a way that mine never was. Robert's opinions carried weight while mine were dismissed without consideration. Actually, Marcus said, glancing at me across the table, there's something I need to tell you both. My heart began to race. Was Marcus going to reveal what had happened this morning? Was he going to force this conversation out into the open before I was ready? Mom gave me quite a birthday surprise this morning, Marcus continued, his voice carefully neutral. It turns out she's been keeping some significant secrets from both of us. Robert looked confused, glancing between Marcus and me. What kind of secrets? Marcus pulled the letter from his jacket pocket and handed it to his father. Why don't you read this for yourself? I watched Robert's face as he read, seeing the same progression of confusion, disbelief, and shock that Marcus had displayed earlier. When he finished, he set the letter down and stared at me as though I had suddenly sprouted wings. Margaret, is this true? Do you really have $3 million in investments? Yes, I said simply. But how is that possible? Where did this money come from? I explained again about my nursing career, my early investments, my decades of careful financial planning. Robert listened in silence, occasionally shaking his head as though trying to process information that didn't fit his understanding of our family's financial situation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Robert asked finally. "We've been married for 38 years. How could you keep something this significant secret?" It was a fair question, but not an easy one to answer. How could I explain that I had kept the money secret? Because I needed something that was entirely mine. Something that couldn't be dismissed or controlled or managed by other people. How could I make him understand that his and Marcus's consistent devaluation of my contributions had made me protective of the one area where I had demonstrated real competence? "I kept it separate because it was mine," I said finally. "I earned it through my own knowledge and decisions. It was proof to myself that I was capable of more than you and Marcus gave me credit for." "But $3 million, Margaret, that changes everything about our financial planning, our retirement, Marcus's future." "Actually, it doesn't change anything," I interrupted. "Because as of this morning, Marcus no longer has access to the trust I established for him." Robert's eyes widened as he absorbed this information. "What do you mean he doesn't have access?" I explained the conditions I had attached to the trust, the requirements Marcus would need to meet in order to claim his inheritance. Robert listened with growing disbelief, occasionally glancing at Marcus as though seeking confirmation that this conversation was really happening. "So you're holding $3 million hostage because Marcus made some thoughtless comments at his engagement party?" Robert asked. The fact that both my husband and my son characterized Marcus's deliberate public humiliation of me as merely thoughtless comments, or some stupid comment, revealed everything I needed to know about how they truly saw the situation. Even now, faced with serious consequences, neither of them could acknowledge the genuine cruelty of what Marcus had done. "I'm not holding anything hostage," I said firmly. "I'm attaching reasonable conditions to a gift that Marcus never knew, existed, and was never entitled to receive. If he wants the money, he can earn it by treating me with basic human decency." "But Mom," Marcus said, speaking for the first time since handing Robert the letter, "this isn't fair. You're punishing me for being honest about our family dynamic. Everyone knows that Dad is the breadwinner and you're the homemaker. That's just how our family works." "And how exactly does our family dynamic justify you calling me a decorative piece with nothing meaningful to offer?" Marcus flushed, glancing around the restaurant as though worried other diners might overhear our conversation. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was just trying to be funny. Funny? I stared at my son, wondering how I had raised someone who could consider public humiliation humorous. "You thought it would be funny to tell 200 people that your mother is worthless." "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said. I was there, Marcus. So were 200 other people." Robert held up his hands as though trying to referee a boxing match. "Okay, let's all calm down. This is getting heated, and we're in public." His primary concern was avoiding a scene rather than addressing the substance of our conflict. Once again, Robert was positioning himself as the reasonable mediator while treating my legitimate grievances as emotional overreactions that needed to be managed rather than addressed. "You're right," I said, reaching for my purse. "This conversation is too important to have in a restaurant." I stood up, causing both men to look at me in surprise. "I'm going home. When you're both ready to have a serious discussion about respect and consequences, you know where to find me." "Margaret, sit down," Robert said in the firm tone he usually reserved for difficult patients. "We need to talk through this situation like adults." "I am talking like an adult. I'm the only one at this table who is. I'm setting boundaries and demanding respect. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why." I walked, out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving my husband and son to figure out how to process the evening's revelations. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for several minutes, my hands shaking as the adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade. This was the hardest thing I had ever done. Challenging my family, demanding respect, risking relationships that had defined my life for decades. But it was also the most important thing I had ever done. If I didn't fight for my own worth, who would? The drive home gave me time to think about what would happen next. Robert and Marcus would undoubtedly spend the rest of the evening discussing my unreasonable behavior and trying to figure out how to handle what they would see as my financial manipulation. They might decide to present a united front against me, or they might disagree about the best way to respond. Either way, I had set events in motion that couldn't be undone. My family now knew that I had resources and power they hadn't imagined. They knew that their dismissive treatment of me carried real consequences. Most importantly, they knew that I was no longer willing to accept being treated as though I didn't matter. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my living room, looking out at the garden I had cultivated over the years. The roses Robert had dismissed as a frivolous hobby, the vegetable garden Marcus had barely noticed, the careful landscaping that increased our property value substantially. Even my gardening, something they saw as decorative busywork, had contributed real value to our family's wealth. I thought about my grandmother, who had taught me to save money and invest wisely. She had lived through wars and economic upheavals, and she understood that women needed to be financially independent. Never let anyone convince you that you're not capable, she had told me when I was young, and never let anyone take away your power to choose. I had forgotten that lesson for too many years, allowing myself to be convinced that I was incapable of understanding complex financial matters, that my contributions to our family were purely domestic and therefore less valuable. But my grandmother's wisdom had stayed with me subconsciously, guiding my investment decisions and helping me build the financial foundation that was now forcing my family to confront their assumptions about my worth. The front door opened around 10 o'clock. I heard Robert's footsteps in the hallway, slow and heavy with the weight of difficult conversations. He appeared in the living room doorway, loosening his tie as he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Yes, we do." Robert sat down across from me, running his hands through his graying hair. "Margaret, I don't understand what's happening here. In 38 years of marriage, you've never done anything like this. You've never been confrontational or demanding or difficult?" I suggested. I was going to say assertive. "You've always been so supportive, so willing to go along with what Marcus and I thought was best. This feels like you're becoming a different person." His words revealed the heart of the problem. Robert was comfortable with a wife who supported his decisions without question, who deferred to his judgment in all important matters, who created a peaceful home environment where his needs and preferences took priority. The idea that I might have my own opinions, my own resources, my own agenda was genuinely disturbing to him. "I'm not becoming a different person," I said carefully. "I'm remembering who I was before I let you and Marcus convince me that I didn't matter." "We never said you didn't matter. You didn't have to say it. You showed it every day, every interrupted conversation, every dismissed opinion, every decision made without consulting me. You showed it most clearly when Marcus publicly humiliated me and you said nothing to defend me." Robert was quiet for a long moment, perhaps reviewing our interactions with fresh perspective. "I've always respected you, Margaret. I've always appreciated everything you do for our family." "Have you? When was the last time you asked for my opinion about something important? When did you last consider that I might have insights worth hearing?" Another long silence. Robert's inability to quickly answer these questions was answer enough. "The money," he said finally. $3 million, Margaret. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me about it? Because you would have wanted to manage it. You would have had opinions about how it should be invested, what it should be used for, when it should be spent. It would have stopped being mine and become ours, which really means it would have become yours. Is that really what you think? Of me? That I would try to control your money? I looked at my husband, this man I had loved for nearly 4 decades, and tried to find a way to make him understand. Robert, you've been controlling everything else in our lives for years. Our social calendar, our financial planning, our family decisions. You don't ask for my input because you don't value it. Why would money be different? We sat in silence as Robert processed this accusation. I could see him reviewing our relationship, perhaps recognizing patterns he had never noticed before, but I could also see resistance, the natural human tendency to reject criticism that requires fundamental changes in behavior. What do you want from me? He asked finally. It was the same question Marcus had essentially asked, and it revealed the same fundamental misunderstanding. Both men saw this as a problem to be solved, a demand to be met, rather than an opportunity to examine and improve our relationships. I want you to see me, I said simply. I want you to understand that I'm more than a support system for your life and career. I want you to recognize that I have thoughts and feelings and capabilities that deserve your respect. Of course I see you. Of course I respect you. Then prove it. Start including me in important decisions. Ask for my opinions and actually listen to the answers. Stop dismissing my interests as hobbies and my concerns as emotional overreactions. Robert nodded slowly, but I could tell he was still struggling to understand why this conversation was necessary. In his mind, our marriage had been working perfectly well. The fact that it hadn't been working for me was a problem he needed to solve rather than a wake-up call about fundamental issues in our relationship. And Marcus? He asked. Are you really going to keep that money from him unless he meets your conditions? Yes. Even if it means destroying your relationship with him? The question hung between us like a sword. Was I prepared to lose my son over this? Was my demand for respect worth the risk of permanent estrangement? Robert, what kind of relationship do Marcus and I have now? One where he treats me like hired help and publicly humiliates me for entertainment. One where my love and support are taken for granted while my thoughts and feelings are dismissed. Is that really a relationship? Worth preserving? Robert couldn't answer immediately, which told me he was beginning to understand the depth of the problem. Our family dynamic hadn't been working for me for years, but because it worked well for Robert and Marcus, they had never examined it critically. Maybe we should all talk together, Robert suggested. Maybe we can work out some kind of compromise. There's nothing to compromise about. The conditions I've set for Marcus are reasonable. They require nothing more than basic human decency. If he can't meet them, then he doesn't deserve access to money I earned through my own efforts. Robert stood up, clearly exhausted by the emotional weight of the evening. I need time to process all of this. The money, the conditions, what you're asking from both of us. This is a lot to absorb. Take all the time you need, but understand that I'm not going to back down from this. I'm not going to return to being invisible in my own family just to keep everyone comfortable. After Robert went upstairs, I remained in the living room for another hour, thinking about the day's events and what they meant for my family's future. The conversation with Marcus had gone about as I expected, with shock giving way to resentment and accusations of unfairness. The guy. Dinner confrontation had been more difficult than I anticipated, but it had served the important purpose of making Robert aware of the situation. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see how they would respond. Would Marcus swallow his pride and meet the conditions I had set? Would Robert examine his own behavior and make genuine changes? Or would they both dig in their heels and force me to follow through on my threat to dissolve the trust? I thought about Charlotte and how this situation would affect her relationship with Marcus. She seemed like a genuinely nice young woman, someone who might be able to help Marcus see this situation more clearly. But I also knew that Marcus could be very persuasive when he wanted to be, very skilled at positioning himself as the victim in any conflict. The next few weeks would test everyone's character and priorities. Marcus would have to decide whether his pride was worth $3 million. Robert would have to decide whether he was willing to examine and change patterns that had defined our marriage for decades. And I would have to decide whether I was strong enough to follow through on the ultimatum I had issued. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I had stopped waiting for others to recognize my worth and had started demanding it myself. Whatever happened next, I would face it as Margaret Chen, a woman of substance and accomplishment, rather than as the invisible decoration my family had convinced me I was. The $3 million had never really been about the money. It had been about proving to myself that I was capable of building something significant, something that demonstrated my intelligence and planning ability. Now, it was serving a different purpose, forcing my family to confront truths they had been avoiding for years. Change was never easy, especially when it required people to acknowledge their own shortcomings. But sometimes love required difficult choices, uncomfortable conversations, and the courage to risk everything in pursuit of something better. I was betting everything on the possibility that my husband and son loved me enough to see me clearly, to treat me with respect, to value the person I had always been beneath the role they had assigned me. Time would tell whether that bet would pay off. The silence in our house over the following days was thick and uncomfortable, like the oppressive air before a thunderstorm. Robert went about his daily routines with mechanical precision, leaving for the hospital early and returning late, avoiding meaningful conversation beyond the basics of household management. When we did speak, his words were careful and measured, as though he was afraid of saying something that might trigger another confrontation. Marcus didn't call or visit, which wasn't entirely unusual, but felt weighted with new significance given our recent conversation. I found myself checking my phone more frequently than normal, wondering if he was processing what I had told him, or simply hoping the situation would resolve itself without any effort on his part. Charlotte called twice during that first week, both times ostensibly to discuss wedding planning details, but really to gauge the temperature of our family crisis. Her voice carried a nervous energy that told me Marcus had shared at least some version of recent events with her. "Mrs. Chen, I hope you know that Marcus is really struggling with this situation," she said during our second conversation. "He's been having trouble sleeping, and he keeps saying he doesn't understand why you're doing this to him." The phrase, "doing this to him," crystallized everything that was wrong with Marcus's perspective. Even now, even after learning about the substantial gift I had planned for him and the reasonable conditions I had attached to it, he saw himself as the victim in this scenario. He was unable or unwilling to consider that his own behavior had created this situation. "I'm not doing anything to Marcus," I replied calmly. "I'm responding to what he did to me. There's a difference. But surely you can understand how confusing this is for him. He had no idea you had this money, and now suddenly his entire future is dependent on meeting conditions that feel arbitrary to him." Charlotte's attempt to advocate for Marcus was understandable, but it also revealed how effectively he had managed to frame the situation in his favor. The conditions weren't arbitrary, they were directly related to the behavior that had prompted my response. But Marcus had apparently presented them to Charlotte as unreasonable demands rather than natural consequences of his own actions. "The conditions are quite simple," I said. "Treat me with respect. Acknowledge my worth as a person. Make amends for publicly humiliating me. These aren't arbitrary requirements. They're basic expectations for any healthy relationship." Charlotte was quiet for a moment and I could almost hear her processing this perspective. She had witnessed Marcus's engagement party speech firsthand, had been mortified by his behavior in the moment. Perhaps she was beginning to understand that my response wasn't as unreasonable as Marcus had made it seem. "He does love you," she said finally. "I know Marcus doesn't always express it well, but he really does care about you. Then he should have no trouble meeting the conditions I've outlined." After Charlotte hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about love and how it gets expressed in families. Marcus might genuinely love me in some abstract sense, but that love had never translated into respect or consideration for my feelings. If anything, his love seemed to be conditional on my continued willingness to accept whatever treatment he chose to give me. Robert emerged from his study that evening looking haggard and older than his 64 years. He had been spending increasing amounts of time behind his closed door, presumably trying to process the revelations about my secret wealth and what they meant for our marriage. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began carefully, settling into his usual armchair across from where I sat reading. "About feeling invisible, about not being included in decisions." I set down my book and gave him my full attention. This was the first time since Marcus's birthday dinner that Robert had initiated a serious conversation about our relationship rather than simply trying to manage the crisis. "I think I understand now why you kept the money secret," he continued. "I've been reviewing our financial discussions over the years, and I realize that I've been making most of the decisions without really asking for your input." His admission was a start, but I could hear the careful phrasing, the way he was acknowledging problems without fully accepting responsibility for them. He was treating this like a medical diagnosis, identifying symptoms without necessarily understanding the underlying disease. "It's not just financial decisions, Robert. It's everything. Where we go on vacation, which social events we attend, how we spend our weekends, what we talk about at dinner. You've been directing our life together as though I'm a passenger rather than a partner." Robert nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose I've gotten used to being the decision-maker at work, and I've carried that attitude home without thinking about how it affects you." And Marcus learned that pattern from watching us. He absorbed the idea that men's opinions matter more than women's, that fathers' voices carry weight while mothers' voices can be safely ignored. "Is that really what you think? That I've taught Marcus to disrespect women?" The question seemed to genuinely trouble Robert, and I could see him mentally reviewing Marcus's behavior through this new lens. As a cardiologist, Robert worked with many female colleagues whom he treated with professional respect. But at home, he had unconsciously modeled a different dynamic, one where masculine authority was assumed and feminine perspective was minimized. "I think you've taught Marcus that my perspective specifically doesn't matter as much as yours. Whether he generalizes that to other women remains to be seen." We talked for another hour, the longest meaningful conversation we had shared in months. Robert asked questions about my investments, expressing genuine curiosity about strategies I had used and returns I had achieved. For the first time in years, he seemed truly interested in my thoughts and opinions about something substantial. But even as we talked, I could sense his underlying discomfort with the shift in our dynamic. Robert was accustomed to being the expert, the authority, the one with superior knowledge and judgment. Learning that I had successfully managed a complex investment portfolio, while he remained completely unaware, challenged his fundamental assumptions about our respective capabilities. "What happens now?" he asked as we prepared to go upstairs for the night. "With us, I mean. How do we move forward from here?" It was a fair question, and one I had been pondering myself. My ultimatum to Marcus had forced certain issues into the open, but it hadn't automatically resolved the deeper problems in our marriage. Robert's new awareness of his dismissive patterns was encouraging, but awareness alone wouldn't be enough to create lasting change. "We learn to be partners," I said simply. Real partners, where both of our perspectives matter and both of our voices are heard. It won't be easy because it means changing habits we've both fallen into over decades. And if I can't change? If I slip back into old patterns? His question revealed both self-awareness and genuine concern about his ability to sustain different behavior. I appreciated his honesty, even as it highlighted the magnitude of the challenge we faced. Then we'll have to decide whether our marriage can survive that, I replied. I'm not going back to being invisible, Robert. I can't do it anymore. The weight of that statement settled between us as we turned off the lights and headed upstairs. For 38 years, our marriage had operated according to certain unspoken rules and assumptions. Now those rules were being questioned, and we were both going to have to learn new ways of being together. Over the next several days, I began to notice small changes in Robert's behavior. He asked for my opinion about restaurant choices when we made dinner plans. He consulted me before accepting a social invitation from colleagues. He even requested my thoughts about a challenging case he was handling at the hospital. Something he hadn't done in years. These gestures were encouraging, but they also felt tentative and self-conscious, like someone learning a new language and carefully constructing each sentence. I knew that real change would take time and consistent effort, and I tried to be patient with the process while remaining alert to any signs that Robert was simply going through the motions to placate me. Marcus remained absent from our lives during this period, and his silence felt increasingly pointed as the days passed. I had given him a clear path to restore his access to the trust fund, but he seemed to be hoping that time would somehow resolve the situation without requiring any effort or acknowledgement of wrongdoing on his part. 2 weeks after our confrontation, Charlotte called with news that explained Marcus's continued absence. They had decided to move up their wedding date and were planning a small ceremony in the next month rather than the large spring celebration we had all been anticipating. We want something intimate, Charlotte explained. Just immediate family and a few close friends. We've been talking about how much pressure there is around big weddings, and we decided we'd rather focus on our commitment to each other. The sudden change in plans felt like more than a desire for intimacy. It felt like Marcus's attempt to force a resolution to our standoff by creating a situation where I would be pressured to back down from my conditions in order not to ruin his wedding. That sounds lovely, I said carefully. When were you thinking of having the ceremony? November 15th. I know it's short notice, but we found a venue that had a cancellation, and it just feels right. November 15th was less than 3 weeks away, which meant that if Marcus wanted to meet my conditions in time for the Christmas party acknowledgement, he would need to begin that process soon. The timing felt calculated to create urgency and pressure around my ultimatum. Have you and Marcus discussed the situation with the trust fund? I asked directly. Charlotte's pause told me everything I needed to know. He's hoping that maybe, with the wedding coming up, you might be willing to reconsider some of the conditions. Which conditions specifically? Well, the public apology part seems particularly difficult for him. He's worried about looking weak or foolish in front of your friends and family, so Marcus was willing to go through the motions of spending time with me and even writing an apology letter. But he drew the line at publicly acknowledging his mistake. His pride was more important to him than $3 million, more important than his relationship with his mother. The public acknowledgement isn't negotiable, I said firmly. Marcus humiliated me publicly, and his amends need to be equally public. That's how accountability works. But Mrs. Chen, surely you can understand how embarrassing that would be for him. Charlotte's appeal revealed how little she truly understood about what had happened and why it mattered. She was focused on Marcus's potential embarrassment, rather than the actual embarrassment he had already caused me. Like Marcus, she seemed to think that my feelings were less important than his comfort. Charlotte, do you remember what Marcus said about me at your engagement party? Yes, and I know it was inappropriate, but he called me a decorative piece with nothing meaningful to offer, in front of 200 people, How embarrassing do you think that was for me? Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. I hadn't really thought about it that way. Maybe you should. Maybe you should ask yourself why Marcus's potential embarrassment matters more to you than the embarrassment he already caused me. We ended the conversation shortly after that, with Charlotte promising to talk to Marcus about the importance of meeting all the conditions rather than trying to negotiate around the most difficult one. But I wasn't optimistic about her ability to influence his decision. That evening, I shared the wedding news with Robert over dinner. His reaction was measured but concerned, clearly recognizing the pressure tactics involved in the sudden schedule change. "Do you think he's trying to force your hand?" Robert asked. "I think he's hoping that the prospect of missing his wedding will make me back down from my conditions." "And will it?" I considered the question carefully. Missing Marcus's wedding would be painful, but attending while our fundamental issues remained unresolved would be worse. I couldn't celebrate his new beginning while he continued to refuse acknowledging the hurt he had caused me. "No," I said finally. "If Marcus chooses to get married without meeting the conditions, that's his decision. But I won't compromise my principles to attend a celebration hosted by someone who thinks I'm worthless." Robert reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture of support that felt genuine rather than calculated. "I know this is hard for you. It's hard for all of us. The hard part isn't setting boundaries," I replied. "The hard part is that they're necessary at all." As November 15th approached, I found myself in the strange position of hoping my son would surprise me while preparing for the likelihood that he wouldn't. I had given him everything he needed to restore our relationship and secure his financial future, but I couldn't force him to choose wisely. The wedding invitations arrived by messenger on a Thursday afternoon, elegant cards requesting our presence at Marcus and Charlotte's ceremony. Looking at the beautiful invitation, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in Marcus's happiness, sadness about our fractured relationship, and determination to maintain the boundaries I had set, despite the personal cost. That same afternoon, Marcus finally called. His voice was strained but determined when I answered the phone. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Can I come over tonight?" "Of course." "And can we do this without Dad being involved? I think this conversation needs to be just between us." I agreed, though I wondered what had prompted Marcus's sudden willingness to engage directly rather than working through intermediaries or hoping the situation would resolve itself. Perhaps Charlotte had convinced him that avoiding the issue wasn't going to make it disappear. Marcus arrived that evening, looking tired and older than his 30 years. The confident young man who had dismissed me so casually at his engagement. Party had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began as we sat in the living room, "about respect and accountability and all of that." I waited for him to continue, resisting the urge to make this conversation easier for him by jumping in with reassurances or suggestions. "I still think your conditions are extreme," he said carefully, "but I'm willing to meet them if it means we can put this behind us." His phrasing revealed that he still didn't understand the deeper issues at stake. He saw this as a transaction, a set of hoops to jump through in order to access money and restore family harmony. He wasn't approaching it as an opportunity for genuine reflection or growth. "Marcus, this isn't about putting anything behind us. This is about changing how we treat each other going forward." "Right. Okay. I get that. So where do we start?" The question was encouraging even if his understanding remained superficial. At least he was willing to begin the process, which was more than I had expected given his silence over the past few weeks. "We start with you explaining to me why what you said at your engagement party was wrong." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It was wrong because it hurt your feelings." "And why else? Because it wasn't appropriate to say in public?" His answers revealed that he still didn't grasp the fundamental problem with his attitude toward me. He understood that his comments had been hurtful and inappropriate, but he didn't seem to recognize that they had been factually wrong and deeply unfair. "Marcus, do you actually believe what you said about me? Do you really think I'm just a decorative piece with nothing meaningful to offer?" The directness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently struggling to find words that wouldn't get him into further trouble. "I mean, you've never had a career like Dad or me," he said finally. "Your life has been pretty comfortable and sheltered." His response confirmed my worst fears. Marcus wasn't apologizing because he recognized that his assessment of me had been wrong. He was apologizing because expressing that assessment publicly had caused problems for him. "Marcus, what do you know about my life before I married your father? You were a nurse, right? But that was a long time ago. I was a nurse who came to this country with nothing and built a life through hard work and determination. I was a nurse who saved every dollar she could and invested it wisely. I was a nurse who has continued making successful financial decisions for over 20 years while also raising you and supporting your father's career." Marcus looked confused, as though this information didn't fit his understanding of who I was and what I was capable of. "Do you know how much money I've made through my investments?" I continued. "The trust fund you mentioned, right? $3 million? That's just the money I set aside for you. My total portfolio is worth considerably more than that." The shock on Marcus's face was genuine. He had never considered that I might have independent wealth, might be capable of complex financial management, might be contributing to our family's security in ways he had never imagined. "How much more?" he asked quietly. "Enough to be financially independent. Enough to support myself comfortably without your father's income. Enough to prove that I'm far from the decorative piece you described." We sat in silence as Marcus processed this information. I could see him trying to reconcile his image of me as a sheltered homemaker with the reality of my financial accomplishments. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked finally. "Because you never asked. Because you assumed you knew everything about me based on the role I played in your daily life. Because you never considered that I might have depth and complexity beyond what was immediately visible to you." The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus asking questions about my investments and expressing amazement at returns I had achieved. For the first time in years, he seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences rather than simply tolerating my presence. But even as we talked, I remained cautious about interpreting this change as genuine growth, rather than a strategic adjustment designed to secure his inheritance. Time would tell whether Marcus's newfound respect for my capabilities would translate into lasting changes in how he treated me. "So, what happens now?" Marcus asked as our conversation wound down. "What do I need to do to meet your conditions?" I outlined the specific requirements again, emphasizing that each element was important and non-negotiable. The written apology needed to demonstrate genuine understanding of what he had done wrong. The time we spent together needed to involve real conversation and mutual respect, and the public acknowledgement needed to be sincere and specific. "The Christmas party is still 6 weeks away," I noted. "That gives you time to work on the first 2 conditions before making the public acknowledgement." Marcus nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. "And if I do all of this, if I meet all your conditions, then everything goes back to normal?" His question revealed the persistent misunderstanding at the heart of our conflict. Marcus still thought this was about returning to our previous dynamic, rather than establishing a new and healthier pattern of interaction. "Marcus, nothing is going back to normal. Normal wasn't working for me. We're going to have to build a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect, rather than your assumption that I exist primarily to serve your needs." As Marcus prepared to leave, he turned back to me with an expression I hadn't seen from him in years. Vulnerability mixed with something that might have been the beginning of genuine remorse. "Mom, I really didn't realize how much I had hurt you. I thought you were just being overly sensitive about some dumb comment I made. And now? Now I'm starting to understand that maybe I don't know you as well as I thought I did. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a beginning. For the first time since this crisis began, I felt cautiously optimistic that Marcus might be capable of the growth and change our relationship required. Over the following days, Marcus began making genuine efforts to meet the conditions I had outlined. He called regularly, asking about my day and actually listening to my responses. He stopped by the house twice, engaging in real conversations about topics ranging from his work to my garden to memories from his childhood. Most significantly, he began working on his written apology. Rather than dashing off a quick note, he spent time crafting something thoughtful and specific. He asked me questions about my experience at the engagement party, listened to my answers without defensiveness, and incorporated that feedback into his letter. The apology he eventually presented was far from perfect, but it demonstrated genuine effort and a growing understanding of how his behavior had affected me. He acknowledged that his comments had been cruel and inaccurate, admitted that he had taken my contributions to our family for granted, and expressed regret for the pain he had caused. Robert watched these developments with a mixture of relief and curiosity. He seemed genuinely pleased to see Marcus making an effort, but he also appeared to be learning things about both his wife and his son that he had never recognized before. "I had no idea you were capable of this kind of strategic thinking," Robert confessed one evening as we discussed Marcus's progress. "The way you've handled this situation, the way you've forced him to confront his behavior while giving him a clear path to redemption, it's brilliant." His comment was meant as a compliment, but it also revealed how thoroughly Robert had underestimated my capabilities. Like Marcus, he was discovering that I was more complex and competent than he had previously recognized. As November 15th approached, Marcus's wedding preparations proceeded alongside his efforts to meet my conditions. Charlotte seemed relieved by the progress he was making, though she remained anxious about whether everything would be resolved in time for their ceremony. The question of my attendance at the wedding remained unspoken but present in all our interactions. Marcus had met 2 of my 3 conditions, but the public acknowledgement wasn't scheduled until the Christmas party. Technically, he hadn't fully earned his inheritance yet, which meant our relationship remained in a state of conditional repair. 3 days before the wedding, Marcus asked to speak with me privately once more. When he arrived, he seemed nervous, but determined, carrying himself with a new kind of humility that I found encouraging. "I want you to know that meeting your conditions hasn't just been about getting access to the trust fund," he said. "It's made me realize how badly I've been treating you, and how much I've been missing out on by not really knowing who you are." His words felt genuine, and I found myself cautiously hopeful that we were building towards something better than we had lost. "I hope you'll come to the wedding," Marcus continued. "Not because I've technically met all your conditions yet, but because I want you there, because I love you, and because I'm finally starting to understand how to show that love in ways that actually matter to you." The invitation was simple and sincere, free of the manipulation and pressure tactics that had characterized his earlier approaches to our conflict. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was talking to my son rather than to someone trying to manage me. "I'll be there," I said simply. The relief on Marcus's face was immediate and profound. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means everything to me." As I prepared for Marcus's wedding, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible moment at his engagement party. The crisis had forced all of us to examine patterns and assumptions that had been damaging our relationships for years. While the process had been painful, it had also created opportunities for growth and healing that might never have emerged otherwise. The trust fund had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had been in how we saw and treated each other. Marcus was learning to recognize my worth as an individual rather than simply as his mother. Robert was beginning to understand the importance of true partnership in marriage. and I was reclaiming my voice and my place in my own family. The wedding would be a celebration of Marcus and Charlotte's new beginning, but it would also mark a new chapter in our family's story, a chapter where respect was mutual, where voices were heard, and where love was demonstrated through actions rather than simply assumed through relationships. Walking into that ceremony, I wouldn't be the invisible woman my family had taken for, granted for so many years. I would be Margaret Chen, a woman of substance and accomplishment, a mother who had demanded better treatment and received it, a wife who had refused to accept less than she deserved. The $3 million had never really been about money. It had been about recognition, about respect, about proving that even the most overlooked person in a family might have more to offer than anyone realized. In the end, that lesson had been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of uncertainty, every risk I had taken in demanding the treatment I deserved. The morning of Marcus's wedding dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the oak trees that lined our neighborhood. I stood at my bedroom window, watching leaves drift slowly to the ground while sipping my first cup of coffee. In a few hours, I would watch my son marry the woman he loved, marking not just the beginning of their life together, but hopefully the continuation of our own healing relationship. Robert was already downstairs, unusually energetic for a Saturday morning. I could hear him moving around the kitchen, the clink of dishes and the soft murmur of what sounded like a phone conversation. When I joined him, he was just hanging up from a call with his colleague, Dr. Martinez, discussing coverage for his patients while we attended the ceremony. "You look beautiful," he said, taking in my appearance as I entered the kitchen. I had chosen a burgundy dress with a subtle floral pattern, elegant without being attention-grabbing. After months of feeling invisible, I wanted to strike the right balance between celebrating the occasion and maintaining my newfound sense of dignity. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the fresh cup of coffee he offered. "Are you nervous?" "About the wedding? No, I think it's going to be lovely. Charlotte's family has done a wonderful job with the arrangements." He paused, studying my face. "Are you nervous?" The question carried weight beyond typical pre-wedding jitters. We both knew that today would be a test of whether the progress Marcus and I had made over the past few weeks was genuine or simply performative. Would he treat me with the respect he had been showing in private, or would the presence of his friends and Charlotte's family prompt a return to his old dismissive patterns? "A little," I admitted, "but I'm also hopeful." The ceremony was being held at a historic mansion in Lake Forest, the same venue where Robert and I had attended countless charity events over the years. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus and Charlotte had chosen a location where I had spent decades being treated as an accessory to my husband's professional success. Today, I was determined to attend as my own person, with my own accomplishments and my own worth. We arrived at the venue 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The November afternoon was cool but pleasant, and guests were mingling on the mansion's wraparound porch and in the beautifully landscaped gardens. I recognized many faces from our social circle, people who had witnessed Marcus's engagement party speech and would undoubtedly be watching today to see how our family dynamic had evolved. Charlotte's parents, James and Patricia Whitman, greeted us warmly as we approached the reception area. I had known them casually for several years through various social events, and they had always been gracious and welcoming. Today, however, I sensed a slight tension in their manner, a careful politeness that suggested they were aware of recent family complications. "Margaret, you look lovely," Patricia said, embracing me with what felt like genuine affection. "We're so pleased you could be here today." Her emphasis on the word pleased was subtle but unmistakable. Clearly, there had been some uncertainty about my attendance, which meant Marcus had shared at least some version of our recent conflicts with Charlotte's family. I wondered what explanation he had given for the possibility that his own mother might miss his wedding. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, I replied truthfully. Whatever challenges Marcus and I had faced, this was still his wedding day, and Charlotte was a lovely young woman who deserved a celebration free from family drama. As we moved through the crowd, I noticed several people watching me with curious expressions. Word had clearly spread about some kind of family tension, though I doubted anyone knew the full story of the trust fund and my conditions. Still, the attention felt different from the dismissive glances I was accustomed to receiving at social events. There was a new quality of interest, almost respect, as though people were seeing me as a person worth paying attention to rather than simply Robert's quiet wife. Dr. Harrison and his wife Linda approached us near the garden entrance. Dr. Harrison worked with Robert at the hospital, and Linda had served on several charity committees with me over the years. Their greeting was warmer than usual, and Linda seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my recent activities. "Margaret, I heard you've been doing some fascinating work with investments," Linda said, lowering her voice slightly. "I'd love to hear more about that sometime. My portfolio could use some expert guidance." I was momentarily taken aback. How had Linda learned about my financial activities? Then I realized that Robert must have mentioned my investment success to his colleagues, perhaps as a way of processing his own surprise at my hidden capabilities. The idea that he was now speaking about me with pride rather than benign dismissal was both encouraging and long overdue. "I'd be happy to discuss it," I replied. "Investment strategy is something I've become quite passionate about over the years." As Linda and I talked, I noticed Robert watching our conversation with an expression of quiet amazement. He was seeing me interact with confidence and expertise about a subject he had never associated with my interests or abilities. After 38 years of marriage, he was discovering new aspects of his wife's personality and capabilities. 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Marcus appeared at my side. He looked handsome and nervous in his tailored charcoal gray suit, his hair carefully styled and his usual confident demeanor softened by pre-wedding emotion. "Mom, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked quietly. We stepped away from the crowd, walking toward a secluded corner of the garden where we could speak privately. Marcus seemed to be struggling with how to begin, opening his mouth several times before finally finding his words. "I want to thank you for coming today," he said. "I know things have been complicated between us, and I wasn't sure you would be here. I told you I would be here, and I meant it. I know, but I also know I haven't exactly earned your trust lately." He paused, looking out across the garden before meeting my eyes again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about respect and seeing you as a person rather than just as my mother. I'm still learning how to do that, but I want you to know that I'm trying." His words felt genuine, and I could see traces of the thoughtful child he had once been beneath the entitled adult he had become. The past few weeks had clearly affected him more deeply than I had initially realized. "I can see that you're trying," I replied, "and I appreciate the effort you've been making." "There's something else I want to say," Marcus continued, his voice growing more serious. "I've been telling people, including Charlotte's family, that you're not just my mother, but also one of the smartest financial minds I know. I've been sharing some of what you've told me about your investment strategies, and people are really impressed." This was news to me, and I felt a rush of unexpected emotion at the thought of Marcus actively promoting my expertise rather than hiding or dismissing it. For years, he had treated my interests and accomplishments as embarrassing secrets to be minimized in public. This represented a fundamental shift in how he saw me and how he wanted others to see me. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a great deal to me. I just want you to know that today isn't about meeting conditions or earning access to money," Marcus continued. "Today is about celebrating love and family, and I'm grateful to have you as part of both." We hugged then, a real embrace rather than the perfunctory social gesture that had characterized our physical affection for years. For the first time since his engagement party speech, I felt like I was hugging my son rather than a stranger who, happened to share my DNA. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Charlotte looked radiant in a simple but elegant gown, and Marcus's face when he saw her walking down the aisle reminded me of why I had fallen in love with his father decades earlier. There was something pure and hopeful about witnessing two people promise to build a life together, especially when that life was beginning with intention and commitment rather than simply following expected social patterns. As I watched Marcus and Charlotte exchange vows, I thought about the different kinds of love that bind families together. Romantic love, like what I was witnessing between the bride and groom. Parental love, which had motivated my recent ultimatum even when it seemed harsh from the outside. And the complex love between spouses who had grown and changed over decades of shared experience. The officiant spoke about the importance of respect in marriage, about seeing and honoring your partner's full humanity rather than reducing them to convenient roles or comfortable assumptions. His words felt particularly relevant given everything our family had experienced over the past few months. During the reception, I found myself genuinely enjoying conversations with people I had known for years, but had never truly connected with. Without the weight of feeling invisible and dismissed, I was free to engage as my authentic self, rather than as the decorative accessory I had been trained to become. Dr. Martinez approached me during cocktail hour, expressing genuine interest in my thoughts about healthcare investing. We had a fascinating 20-minute conversation about market trends and emerging technologies, the kind of substantive discussion I hadn't had at a social event in years. "You should consider speaking at our medical investors group," Dr. Martinez suggested as our conversation concluded. "We're always looking for fresh perspectives from people with your kind of track record." The invitation was both flattering and significant. For the first time, someone was recognizing my expertise and wanting to share it with others. Rather than being seen as someone's wife or someone's mother, I was being acknowledged as Margaret Chen, investment strategist. As the evening progressed, I noticed that Robert was watching my interactions with newfound interest and pride. Instead of the benign tolerance he usually showed when I spoke to his colleagues, he seemed genuinely engaged with what I was saying, and impressed by the responses I was generating. "I had no idea you were such a hit at these events," he said during a quiet moment between dinner courses. "Dr. Martinez hasn't stopped talking about your insights into pharmaceutical investing." "I've always been interested in these topics," I replied. "I just haven't had many opportunities to discuss them seriously." "Well, that's clearly changing," Robert said, his tone carrying something that sounded like genuine respect. During the dinner speeches, Charlotte's father gave a touching toast about the importance of family and the joy of welcoming Marcus into their household. Marcus himself spoke briefly, thanking both families for their support and expressing his excitement about the future he and Charlotte were building together. What struck me most about Marcus's speech was how he spoke about family relationships with new thoughtfulness and maturity. He thanked his parents not just for their support, but for the lessons they had taught him about love, commitment, and the importance of treating people with dignity and respect. "I've learned recently that the people closest to us sometimes have depths and capabilities we never fully appreciate," Marcus said, his eyes meeting mine across the room. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to discover new things about people I thought I already knew completely." His words were clearly directed at me, though they were subtle enough that most guests wouldn't have understood the specific reference. Still, I felt a warm glow of recognition and appreciation. Marcus was publicly acknowledging my worth without making a scene or drawing uncomfortable attention to our recent conflicts. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Charlotte pulled me aside for a private conversation. She looked beautiful and happy, glowing with the satisfaction of a celebration that had exceeded her expectations. "Mrs. Chen, I want you to know how grateful I am for the way you've handled everything with Marcus recently," she said. "I know it hasn't been easy, but I can see how much he's grown from the experience." Her acknowledgement surprised me. I had Wondered how much Charlotte truly understood about the conditions I had set for Marcus, and whether she saw them as reasonable responses to his behavior or as arbitrary punishments. "Growth is never easy," I replied. "But it's worth the discomfort when it leads to better relationships." "Marcus told me about your investment work, about how successful you've been with building wealth for the family. I hope you know how impressive that is, especially for someone of your generation who didn't have the same educational and professional opportunities that women have today." Charlotte's comment revealed both understanding and respect for what I had accomplished under challenging circumstances. She clearly grasped that my financial success was particularly noteworthy, given the limitations that had been placed on women's economic opportunities during my formative years. "Thank you," I said. "I hope Marcus continues to see value in learning from people whose experiences are different from his own. I think he's starting to understand that everyone has something to teach him," Charlotte replied. "Even people he thought he already knew everything about." As Robert and I drove home that evening, we reflected on how different the wedding had felt compared to the engagement party. Where that earlier event had been marked by tension and humiliation, tonight had been characterized by genuine celebration and connection. "You were impressive tonight," Robert said as we pulled into our driveway. "I've never seen you so confident and engaged at a social event." "I've always been capable of confidence and engagement," I replied. "I just haven't felt seen or valued enough to express those qualities." Robert was quiet for a moment, processing the implication of my words. "I'm beginning to understand how much I've missed over the years by not paying closer attention to who you really are." His admission was encouraging, though I knew that sustained change would require more than a single evening of revelation. Still, both Robert and Marcus seemed to be genuinely grappling with their assumptions about me and working to build new patterns of interaction. Over the following week, the positive momentum from the wedding continued. Marcus called twice to share details about his honeymoon planning and to ask for my advice about investment strategies for his and Charlotte's joint finances. For the first time in years, he was treating me as a resource worth consulting rather than an obligation to be managed. Robert also made continued efforts to include me in decision-making and to seek my input on both personal and professional matters. He asked for my thoughts about a potential partnership opportunity at the hospital, and actually listened to my analysis, rather than simply seeking confirmation of his predetermined conclusions. The changes felt fragile, but real. Both men seemed to be making conscious efforts to see and value me differently, though I remained cautious about assuming that these improvements would automatically become permanent. As December approached, bringing with it our annual Christmas party, I began thinking about Marcus's final condition. The public acknowledgement he needed to make wouldn't be a grand gesture or dramatic speech. Instead, it would be an opportunity for him to demonstrate in front of our friends and family that he truly saw me as a person worthy of respect and consideration. The guest list for our Christmas party would include many of the same people who had witnessed Marcus's engagement party speech. This group would provide the perfect audience for him to model the new attitude he had been developing toward me over the past few months. I wasn't looking for an apology speech or a public confession of wrongdoing. What I wanted was simply for Marcus to treat me with genuine respect in front of others, to include me in conversations, to value my contributions, and to demonstrate through his behavior that he saw me as more than a decorative piece in our family. 2 weeks before the party, Marcus asked to meet with me to discuss what he planned to say and do. We met at a quiet coffee shop near his office, away from the family dynamics that sometimes made our conversations more complicated. "I've been thinking about the Christmas party," he said, settling into the chair across from me with his usual punctuality and a cup of black coffee. "I want to make sure I understand what you're looking for in terms of public acknowledgement." His question revealed continued growth in his thinking. Rather than simply trying to meet the technical requirements of my condition, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding the deeper purpose behind it. I'm not looking for a formal apology or a scripted speech, I explained. What I want is for you to interact with me naturally, but with the respect and consideration you've been showing in private. I want our friends and family to see that you value my thoughts and contributions. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So it's more about demonstrating a new pattern of interaction than making some kind of grand gesture. Exactly. I want people to see that we have a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than your assumption that you're automatically more important or knowledgeable than I am. That makes sense, Marcus said. And honestly, after spending time really talking with you these past few weeks, I think that kind of interaction will feel natural rather than forced. His response gave me hope that the changes in our relationship were becoming integrated into his genuine feelings and attitudes, rather than remaining superficial adjustments designed to meet my conditions. We spent another hour discussing the party plans, Marcus's continued progress with treating me respectfully, and his growing appreciation for my financial expertise. By the time we parted, I felt cautiously optimistic that the Christmas party would mark not just the fulfillment of my conditions, but the true beginning of a healthier relationship between us. The week before the party, I received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Martinez, following up on his suggestion that I speak to his medical investors group. The invitation was concrete rather than merely polite, with specific dates and topics for me to consider. We're particularly interested in your perspective on healthcare technology investments, he explained. Your combination of long-term market experience and understanding of emerging trends could be very valuable to our members. Accepting the speaking engagement would represent a significant step forward in my professional development. For decades, I had managed my investments privately, without recognition or opportunity to share my expertise with others. Now I was being invited to step into a more public role as a financial expert. I'd be honored to speak to your group, I replied. Let me review the materials you mentioned, and we can discuss specific topics that would be most useful. After ending the call, I sat in my kitchen feeling a sense of accomplishment and excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Someone was recognizing my expertise and giving me a platform to share it with others. The invisible woman my family had taken for granted was finally being seen and valued for her actual capabilities. That evening, I shared the news with Robert over dinner. His reaction was immediate and enthusiastic, a dramatic contrast to the polite disinterest he had shown toward my activities for so many years. That's wonderful, Margaret. Dr. Martinez is very well connected in the investment community. This could lead to other speaking opportunities. I'm excited about it, I admitted. I've been managing money successfully for decades, but I've never had the chance to help others learn from my experience. Well, you clearly have a lot to offer, Robert said. I'm proud of you for pursuing this opportunity. His words of pride and support felt genuine rather than patronizing. After months of difficult conversations and gradual changes, Robert seemed to be truly embracing the idea of having a wife with her own professional interests and accomplishments. As the Christmas party approached, I found myself looking forward to the event with anticipation rather than anxiety. For the first time in years, I would be attending as Margaret Chen, the investment expert, rather than simply as Robert's wife or Marcus's mother. I would be someone worth listening to, someone with valuable insights to share, someone who deserved respect and consideration. The $3 million trust fund had served its purpose as a catalyst for change, but the real transformation had been in how my family saw me and how I saw myself. The money had never been the point. The recognition, the respect, the acknowledgement of my worth as an individual, those were the prizes that really mattered. Standing in my closet the night before the party, selecting a dress that reflected my newfound confidence and sense of self-worth, I reflected on how much had changed since Marcus's cruel speech at his engagement party. That moment of public humiliation had been devastating, but it had also been necessary. It had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about our family dynamic and make choices about who we wanted to be going forward. Tomorrow night would mark the completion of Marcus's conditions and his full access to the trust fund I had established for him. But more importantly, it would celebrate the beginning of a new chapter in our relationships, one characterized by mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and the recognition that every person in a family has value that deserves to be seen and honored. The decorative piece they had dismissed for so long was ready to take her rightful place at the center of her own life. The morning of our Christmas party arrived with fresh snow blanketing Chicago, transforming our neighborhood into a winter wonderland. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the snowflakes dance in the early morning light, feeling a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. Tonight would mark not just the conclusion of the conditions I had set for Marcus, but the celebration of our family's transformation. Robert was already busy coordinating with the catering staff, his usual meticulous attention to detail ensuring that every aspect of the evening would be perfect. Our annual Christmas party had always been one of the social highlights of our calendar, bringing together colleagues, friends, and family for an evening of celebration and connection. "The flowers look spectacular," Robert called from the dining room, where he was reviewing the arrangements with our florist. "Margaret, you have to see what they've done with the centerpieces." I joined him to admire the elegant displays of winter greenery interspersed with white roses and silver accents. Everything looked sophisticated and festive, creating the perfect atmosphere for what I hoped would be a memorable evening for all the right reasons. "They're beautiful," I agreed, running my fingers along the soft petals of a rose. "Thank you for handling all the coordination." "My pleasure," Robert replied, and I could tell he meant it. Over the past few months, he had begun taking more active interest in the details of our social life, perhaps recognizing that entertaining was more complex and demanding than he had previously realized. By afternoon, I was getting ready with more care than usual. I had chosen a deep emerald green dress that complemented my skin tone and conveyed confidence without being flashy. As I applied my makeup and styled my hair, I thought about how different I felt compared to past parties, where I had prepared myself to fade into the background. Tonight, I would be Margaret Chen, successful investor and soon-to-be public speaker, rather than simply Robert's quiet wife. The transformation felt both exhilarating and slightly nerve-wracking. Marcus and Charlotte arrived early to help with final preparations. Marcus looked handsome in a navy suit, while Charlotte was radiant in a burgundy dress that complemented the evening's color scheme. But what struck me most was the way Marcus immediately sought me out to ask if there was anything he could do to help. "Mom, the house looks incredible," he said, embracing me warmly. "You and Dad have outdone yourselves this year." "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm so glad you and Charlotte could be here early." As we worked together to put finishing touches on the arrangements, I noticed that Marcus consistently included me in conversations and asked for my input on various decisions. His behavior felt natural rather than performative, suggesting that our months of rebuilding had created genuine changes in how he related to me. The first guests began arriving at 6:30, and I found myself genuinely excited to see people I hadn't encountered since Marcus's wedding. Dr. Martinez arrived with his wife, Elena, both of them greeting me with enthusiasm and immediately asking about my upcoming speaking engagement. "Margaret, I've been telling everyone about your presentation next month," Elena said. "Several of my friends who are looking for investment advice have asked if you might be available for private consultations." The idea of offering private investment consulting hadn't occurred to me, but it represented an intriguing possibility for expanding my professional activities beyond the speaking engagement. "I'd certainly be open to discussing that," I replied. "Let me get through the presentation first, and then we can explore other opportunities." As more guests arrived, I was struck by how many people wanted to engage with me in substantive conversations. Linda Harrison asked detailed questions about my investment philosophy. James Whitman sought my thoughts on market trends affecting his law firm's retirement planning. Dr. Patterson's wife inquired about my recommendations for healthcare sector investments. Rather than being treated as a pleasant but peripheral presence, at my own party, I found myself at the center of multiple engaging discussions. People were seeking out my expertise and treating my opinions with genuine respect and interest. Robert watched these interactions with obvious pride and amazement. During a brief lull in conversations, he pulled me aside with an expression of wonder on his face. "I've never seen anything like this," he said quietly. "People are treating you like the expert you obviously are. I feel foolish for not recognizing your capabilities sooner." His admission was both gratifying and poignant. After 38 years of marriage, my husband was finally seeing me clearly for the first time. "Better late than never," I replied, with a smile. "We still have plenty of time to build a partnership that honors both of our strengths." As the evening progressed, I noticed Marcus engaging with various guests in ways that consistently highlighted my accomplishments. When Dr. Sullivan mentioned his concerns about retirement planning, Marcus immediately directed him to me, introducing me as my mother, who's one of the most successful investors I know. When Patricia Whitman commented on the beautiful holiday decorations, Marcus made sure to mention that I had coordinated all the design elements while also managing a substantial investment portfolio. His pride in my accomplishments felt genuine and unforced. The most significant moment came during the informal toast portion of the evening. Robert traditionally said a few words to welcome everyone and express gratitude for their friendship. This year, he invited me to join him in addressing our guests. "Margaret and I want to thank all of you for being such an important part of our lives," Robert began, his arm around my waist in a gesture of genuine partnership. "This year has been one of growth and discovery for our family, and we're grateful to share this celebration with people who matter so much to us." Then he turned to me, his expression encouraging and supportive. "Margaret, would you like to add something?" The invitation to speak felt natural rather than token, and I appreciated the opportunity to address our friends as myself rather than simply as Robert's wife. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "This year has taught me the importance of being seen and valued for who we truly are, not just the roles we play in other people's lives. I'm grateful to have friends who appreciate the full complexity of each person in their lives." The applause that followed felt warm and genuine, and I saw several people nodding in understanding of my words. After the formal toast, Marcus approached me with Charlotte at his side. His expression was serious but not anxious, and I sensed that he was ready to address the final element of our agreement. "Mom, could I have everyone's attention for just a moment?" Marcus called out, his voice carrying the same authority he used in professional settings. The room gradually quieted as guests turned their attention to my son. I felt my heart rate increase slightly, wondering how he would choose to fulfill this final condition. "I wanted to take a moment to publicly acknowledge something important," Marcus began, his voice clear and confident. "Over the past few months, I've learned that my mother is not only one of the most loving and supportive people I know, but also one of the most accomplished." He gestured toward me with obvious pride. "Many of you have discovered tonight what I should have recognized years ago, that Margaret Chen is a brilliant investor who has been building wealth and sharing wisdom far longer than most of us have. Been paying attention to financial markets?" The room was completely quiet now, with all attention focused on Marcus's words. "I've spent too many years taking my mother's contributions for granted and assuming that I understood everything there was to know about her," he continued. "I was wrong, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn who she really is beyond the roles of wife and mother that I had limited her to in my mind." Marcus paused, his eyes meeting mine across the room. "Mom, thank you for refusing to accept being undervalued. Thank you for demanding the respect you've always deserved. And thank you for giving me the chance to become the son you raised me to be." The applause that erupted was immediate and sustained. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the profound satisfaction of hearing my son publicly acknowledge my worth and his own growth. As guests returned to their conversations, many people approached me to comment on Marcus's words and to express their own appreciation for my expertise and contributions. The evening felt like a celebration not just of the holidays, but of my emergence as a fully recognized member of my own family and social circle. Later, as the party wound down and the last guests were leaving, Marcus pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I meant every word I said tonight," he told me quietly. "But more than that, I want you to know that meeting your conditions hasn't been about earning access to money. It's been about becoming a better person and a better son." "I can see that," I replied, "and I'm proud of the growth you've shown." "The trust fund," Marcus said hesitantly. "I know I've technically met all your conditions now, but I want you to know that whether or not you decide to transfer that money, I'm committed to maintaining the changes I've made in how I treat you." His words touched me deeply. The fact that he was explicitly separating his behavioral changes from the financial incentive demonstrated that his transformation was genuine rather than transactional. "The money was always yours, Marcus," I said softly. "The conditions were never about punishment. They were about ensuring that you were mature enough to handle that kind of wealth responsibly." "And do you think I am? Mature enough, I mean?" I looked at my son, seeing not the entitled young man who had humiliated me months earlier, but a thoughtful adult who had learned to value relationships over pride. "Yes," I said simply. "I think you are." The following week, I met with David, Kim at my investment firm to finalize the transfer of the trust fund to Marcus. The process was straightforward, but it carried emotional weight that transcended the financial mechanics. "You should be proud of how you handled this situation," David told me as we completed the paperwork. "It takes courage to demand respect, especially from family members who have taken you for granted." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted, "but also the most important." When I called Marcus to inform him that the transfer was complete, his reaction was gratitude rather than relief or excitement about the money itself. "Thank you for believing I could become someone worthy of this gift," he said. "I won't take your faith in me for granted." Christmas Day with our family felt different from any holiday we had celebrated in years. The conversation flowed naturally, with everyone contributing and no one dominating. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about my investment strategies. Robert sought my input on his retirement planning. Charlotte shared her own professional aspirations and asked for my advice on balancing career and family goals. We were functioning as a family of adults who respected and valued each other, rather than a hierarchy where some voices mattered more than others. In January, I delivered my first professional presentation to Dr. Martinez's medical investors group. The talk was well received, with several attendees requesting follow-up consultations. Within weeks, I had established a small but growing consulting practice, sharing investment expertise with professionals who appreciated my knowledge and experience. The speaking engagement led to other opportunities. I was invited to contribute articles to financial publications, to speak at women's investment clubs, and to mentor young professionals interested in building wealth. At 62, I was embarking on a new career phase that utilized skills I had been developing privately for decades. Robert supported these professional activities enthusiastically, often helping me prepare for presentations and celebrating my successes. Our marriage was evolving into the true partnership I had always hoped it could become. Marcus and Charlotte visited regularly, and our conversations had transformed from superficial social exchanges into substantive discussions about investments, career goals, family planning, and life philosophy. Marcus frequently sought my advice on major decisions, treating my input as valuable rather than obligatory. One evening in late spring, as I sat in my garden reviewing materials for an upcoming presentation, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that terrible moment at Marcus's engagement party. The woman who had felt invisible and worthless had discovered her own voice and claimed her rightful place in her family and community. The $3 million trust fund had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had been internal. I had stopped waiting for others to recognize my worth and had started demanding it myself. I had refused to accept being treated as a decorative piece and had insisted on being seen as a complete person with my own thoughts, feelings, and capabilities. The money had never been about money. It had been about respect, recognition, and the fundamental human dignity that every person deserves. By threatening to withhold Marcus's inheritance, I had forced my family to confront their assumptions about my value and their treatment of me. The risk had been enormous. I could have lost my relationship with my son permanently. I could have damaged my marriage beyond repair. I could have isolated myself from the people I loved most. But sometimes love requires difficult choices. Sometimes caring for someone means allowing them to face the consequences of their actions, even when those consequences are painful. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal creates short-term conflict. Marcus had needed to learn that his words and actions had real-world implications, that treating people with disrespect carried costs he might not be willing to pay. Robert had needed to understand that dismissing my contributions and opinions was damaging our marriage and limiting our potential as partners. The ultimatum had worked because it was backed by genuine consequences and offered a clear path to redemption. I hadn't been interested in punishing anyone or proving my superiority. I had simply demanded the basic respect that every human being deserves. As the sun set over my garden that evening, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had found my voice and learned to use it effectively. I had reclaimed my place in my own family and discovered professional opportunities I had never imagined. The decorative piece they had dismissed for so long had revealed herself to be a woman of substance, intelligence, and considerable capability. The invisible mother had stepped into the light and claimed her rightful recognition. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to demand better treatment, to pursue new goals, or to transform relationships that have become stagnant or harmful. At 62, I was just beginning to explore my full potential. The trust fund had been my secret weapon, but my true strength had come from within. The courage to set boundaries, the wisdom to create consequences, and the love that refused to accept anything less than mutual respect. My family had learned to see me clearly, but more importantly, I had learned to see myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.